Thank you so much, Scott, for doing this for us. And I'm going to let Ashwin do the honors here. Ashwin, come in.
Good morning, Dr. Vadula, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Global Entrepreneurship Education webinar. Today's webinar, an interesting and a very current topic, quite interesting to global entrepreneurship educators. As we all know, the industry workforce needs rapidly changing as the future of work unfolds globally, resulting from disruptive technologies such as robotics, blockchain, and artificial intelligence that are altering the structure and nature of work in unprecedented ways. Industry leaders anticipate a rapidly emerging skills mismatch between the skills that workers currently have and the skills that will be necessary to tackle this new world of work. This webinar will present guidance from emerging research, which is very useful to educators around the globe. Our presenter is Dr. Scott Latham, Associate Professor of Strategy and Management at UMass Lowell in the Manning School of Business. He joined the business school in 2009 after working in the software industry for 12 years. He has managed several entrepreneurial startups in business development capacity. After leaving the industry, in 2005, he earned a PhD in strategic management. His research focuses on organizational decline, environmental turbulence, and innovation, which is published in the top journals in the field, including Economy Management Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, and Harvard Business Review. He is an internationally recognized expert in the future of work and the future of higher education. His perspective has been published in Chronicle, Higher Education, Times Higher Ed, and Insider Higher. In addition to time as a faculty member, he has held several senior administrative positions at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, including Associate Dean PhD program, Interim Dean, Manning School of Business, and Vice Provost Graduate and Professional Education. Please welcome Dr. Latham. Scott?
Hi, good morning, Ashwin, and thank you, Krishna. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, if you want to put on your video, you can do that too, but that's up to you. You don't need to.
Yeah, it's curious why it's not working.
Yeah, there you go. You click on that, what you just clicked.
Okay.
There you go. Okay.
All right. Excellent, thank you. So thank you for that kind introduction, Ashwin. Ashwin and I go back many years, and I have the utmost respect for him, both personally and professionally. He has built many amazing programs here at the university and really embodies for me what it means to be an entrepreneur. So thank you, Ashwin. Today's discussion is on the future of work, and I would really like it to be a discussion. If you have any questions during my presentation, feel free to type them into the chat. I have the chat box open, and I'll try my best to respond in a timely fashion. So let me first just offer a quick agenda. I'd like to just offer my background and my perspective on the future of work. I think it's important since we all come to these types of dynamics with our own biases. And then we'll talk a little about what is being called Industry 4.0 or the future of work, and how creative destruction as a mechanism is changing the way we work. Finally, then the reskilling revolution, what skills are going to be central to folks in the next decade or two. I also want to talk a little about the role that higher education can play, because higher education will be the central delivery mechanism for reskilling. And I think we're a little behind the curve as far as how we approach reskilling, but I want to offer some commentary there, and then I would love to hear your own thoughts and feedback. So, hold on one sec. My perspective on the future of work is largely driven by my own professional experience and my research over the last now almost 20 years. As Ashwin suggested, in the 90s and 2000s, I worked in the software industry, largely in the GIS and ERP segments of the industry. and saw the dot-com boom and bust firsthand. And it amazed me how that dot-com boom transformed the software industry landscape. From that, I did my dissertation on the dot-com boom and bust. Then several years later, did more research on the Great Recession. And now, about 2 years ago, started to see that disruption effect happen again and started to look at the future of work. And I've done a lot of grant-funded work in the area. Did a large-scale worker displacer initiative funded by the Department of Labor, looking at how to help individuals reskill and get back into the workforce. Recently was on an advisory board looking at augmented reality in manufacturing as far as how to put things together with glasses on, giving an augmented reality of the steps involved and the training and so forth. I've also just started a project looking at artificial intelligence in the treatment of depression that hopefully will be funded by the NIH. And most recently, working with New Balance sneaker on a grant proposal looking at cobots. That's people working with robots in apparel, garment, and footwear manufacturing. This work and other has been published in a lot of different outlets, as Ashwin suggested. And finally, I sit on the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston's Reimagining Work initiative, which is a fascinating effort looking at how the future of work is unfolding. So it's something that I have been immersed in now going back for 2 years. But I think it's important. While Ashwin probably wouldn't agree with this characterization, I like to think of myself as somewhat humble. And we are now at the point, I think, of the largest structural change in the way we work in all of human history. And to the point of me being humble, there are 2 points that I would make. The first is, no one knows how the future of work is going to unfold at this point in time, especially after COVID. COVID has reset the future of work in some areas. In other areas, it has accelerated the future of work, but there's still just an enormous amount of uncertainty. So anyone who says that they know how the future of work will evolve, I like to say that they're either lying or they're delusional. And I hold to that. And the reason I say that is not to be funny or, to borrow an expression, tongue in cheek. It's meant to engage you in that we need more people involved in shaping the future of work. And we need smarter, better decisions from our scholars, our business leaders, our politicians, our policymakers. And we have to do that because we have to help folks adapt. Because regardless of how the future of work unfolds, there will be a tremendous amount of pain. Some people will be able to adapt, some people won't. Even the ones that can adapt will have to go through some enormous reskilling. So I hope that this discussion plants a seed with each of you as to how the future of work is going to unfold in your local geography, in your industry, how it's going to affect you personally, and engage you in tackling and better understanding what the future of work means. So now what I'd like to talk about is what the future of work means. You know, when we say the future of work, what is that reference? So I think there is a lot of fear associated with it. To the title of the slide, the robots are coming, the robots are coming. These are some headlines over the past couple of years. Robots is your job at risk. Robots could replace 1/3 of the US workforce. Robots may steal 200 million jobs in the next 15 years. There's a lot of 800 million jobs, excuse me. There's a lot of fear relative to the future of work. Still here. Ignore the future of work or AI revolution at your own peril. Are they going to take your children's jobs? I think the tone here is well framed. And to my comments a few moments ago, it's tough for people to analyze things critically if they're in a state of fear. And I would tell you that we need to stop that. We need to pump the brakes, if you will. Is that change doesn't occur like that. They're not going to drop off 100 robots at the factory floor and install them in the next day. Work has been evolving, at least here in the United States and worldwide, for the last 200 years, as I'll demonstrate in a few seconds, and it's going to continue to do so. So this isn't going to happen overnight. The future of work is going to evolve in ways that we can't even yet understand, and we have time. These are some headlines that basically talk about robots. One of the largest companies here in the Boston area, Rethink, went out of business a little while ago. The robotic process automation bubble, meaning there's a lot of small startup robot companies have gone out of business. So the change isn't happening as quick as we would like or as quick as people thought. But there is what I would call a workforce imperative. And this gets to what we'll talk about in a little while, the reskilling revolution. This change will come, and how do we adapt? And how does we help the workforce adapt? How do we send a child off to college and ensure that they're going to get the right skills? How do we help a displaced worker that's in mid-career? These are the questions that stimulate my work. As I said earlier, most of my grant-funded work helps the individual worker adapt to the future of work. And I think that has to be first and foremost on any agenda. So the future of work is not the first future of work. We are, by most business historians, at what is affectionately being called Industry 4.0. We have Industry 1.0, which was the Industrial Revolution. Industry 2.0 is when we saw mass production come in here in the United States, best characterized by Henry Ford. Industry 3.0 is kind of wrapping up now. We're still at the tail end of Industry 3.0 relative to IT and telecommunications. And now we're entering Industry 4.0. And that is what I would call more advanced technologies, such as artificial intelligence, robotics, biotech, etc. And so if you think even in our lifetime, across Industry 3.0 to 4.0, we've seen 4 distinct steps. We saw in the 70s and 80s, and I'm sure Ashwin remembers this, when everyone was focused on lean and a lot of the manufacturing processes coming out of Japan. And then into the 90s, the big trend was offshoring and outsourcing, looking at the cost of the transaction. Now we're back into automation in the early 2000s. And now, presently, probably, moving forward for the next couple decades, this Industry 4.0 with digitalization and disruptive technologies. So I set the table here just again to demonstrate a lot of what we're dealing with now is things we've been dealing with in our own professional lives. We've always looked for the way for technology to make our work more efficient. Now, though, the difference is the technology is going to be less efficient and more disruptive or destructive. And that's the term creative destruction. When these innovations come in, like artificial intelligence, like blockchain, they open the door to enormous possibilities, but they also cause tremendous destruction. Now, I know it's a global audience today. I didn't have the time to pull these numbers together for a global perspective, but they're out there. I hope that they're still valuable to you, even though they're in the United States. But what this is a survey of the major think tank and research companies and some significant colleges and universities around the level of destruction that the future of work may bring in the next couple decades. You have McKinsey suggesting 73 million jobs will be lost, PricewaterhouseCoopers 61 million, Oxford University 75 million, the Office of Economic and Cooperative Development 54 million, McKinsey's low estimate is 39 million. So what you're seeing, and I don't want to name them off, is these dots come into view, and they are to scale, is when the job losses will occur and also the extent of those job losses. And so this is what concerns a lot of policymakers. And finally, you have Science Alert, which is saying only about 3.5 million. I hope they're right. But what the future of work is in a nutshell and why these job losses are going to occur, it's not complicated. And as you leave this presentation, I hope you do have a better appreciation for what the future of work means. As I said, technology has been affecting us for the past 250 years. It's been intensified over the last 20 years. And what it is technology comes in. And in this case, it's blockchain, AI, automation. It hits a factory. It affects a traditional job, people working on the line, for example, in that factory. Excuse me, just trying to click. And then you see kind of this explosion of new processes. And that's what this diagram is meant to capture. It's new processes, new ways of doing work. And as a result, you need new skills. And that's it. I mean, that is the future of work in a nutshell. Technologies affecting a company, affecting the traditional way they do things, new ways and new processes emerge, and thus new skills. And so the question for us is, what are those new skills? And I'm going to talk about that in a second. As we've seen with those 4 waves of efficiencies, what's driving the change is investment. And this was, and I forgot the source here, but this was either McKinsey or Bain or a significant think tank looking at investment across industries, and these are global numbers. So if you look at it, what is the technology that's going to be adopted by large organizations in the next 4 years? It's big data, it's the Internet of Things, app and web development, digitalization, machine learning, AI, cloud computing. A lot of these terms you're familiar with. The point here is that if companies are going to invest in these types of technologies and expect a return on that investment, then it's going to change the way we work. No one's going to invest millions of dollars in a new AI system and have it sit in a corner. They're going to want it ingrained in helping them do things again more effectively, new business models, you name it. And as a worker, each of you and me, even in higher ed, things are changing here. Ashwin could speak to that, and Krishna as well, is that we need to approach the way we teach differently. And no matter where you are, no matter what industry you're in and what your role is, as I'll demonstrate, you have to think about how these technologies are going to impact your job at the personal level. We're seeing the early impact here in Massachusetts, healthcare. We're seeing electronic medical records adopted, across the industry. RPA is being adopted. Robotic process automation is being adopted. Financial services, AI is getting ingrained. And while I know many of you are not in Massachusetts, the point I'm getting here is, regardless of the geography, again, the industries that are central to the economic well-being of your areas will be affected. Ours are being affected right down this list. So we're on the front edge of dramatic change. IBM suggests that we need to train about 120 million people here in the States on big data. Bloomberg has indicated over the next decade about 250,000 financial services jobs will be lost. So we're dealing with millions of individuals being displaced with no path for reemployment, or more likely, and this is where I fall, and I see this from my own research, more likely we're going to see workers displaced, but there are going to be avenues for reskilling. There are going to be avenues for interacting with future of work technologies and, in theory, making that person's job more fulfilling. We'll see. So that's the workforce imperative to that last point. How do we ensure that individuals are given the proper skills so that they can remain in the workforce? I would comment on this. One of the grants I just put in for the National Science Foundation, the #1 imperative to the grant was worker displacement. And there is here in the United States an enormous amount of concern about what has traditionally been called a low or even medium skilled workers in the blue collar trades, how they're going to be impacted. And so It is first and foremost here with regards to policy and how we reskill. And the term the reskilling revolution, excuse me for 1 second. And maybe this is a good time to pause. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts or comments?
Okay, let me prompt them a little bit. Hi guys, everybody. Good time to do some thinking. There's a chat box. You can always put some questions, comments in there. Let's start doing it. Dr. Scott Latham would like to make this as interactive as possible. It's already provoked you into a state of shock, maybe, maybe thinking, or at least thinking about thinking about what's going to happen to my job, right? It made me think about it. What's going to happen? Fortunately, I'm retired, so I don't have to worry about that too much. So good. Hopefully not shock, but change. There you go. Okay, so yeah, okay, here we go. We start getting a few reactions here. Okay, there you go. Okay, will the slides be available? Sure, they'll be available. You got a robot to take care of that for you. They'll send it to you.
Yes.
Little robot. Okay, automatic. Okay, okay. So it says we have Gajanan saying this is not new. It's been happening for the last 40 years, right? I don't know.
It has. Yeah, the difference is here is that I think people are concerned this time that the technology won't be part of the job equation, but will replace the job. And so, you know, for example, 20 years ago, and this is another point I want to make, 20 years ago, accounting was transformed when enterprise resources planning systems came into organizations like SAP and Oracle. Now, if you look at the popular press, they will tell you that accounting jobs are at risk, that a lot of what accountants do is standardized, thus could be done by AI. And this is not a low skill, high skill calculus. There are jobs across the spectrum that are at risk of being displaced. So yes, it has been going on, but this time the disruption might be a little more painful, unfortunately.
Okay, question from Aditya. Comment: what do you think of biotech, a new field which might absorb people?
I think biotech, so biotech is still getting, if you look at some of the vaccines that came in response to COVID, AI played a significant role in the development of those vaccines. So I think biotech, as I suggested, you know, here in Massachusetts, and debatably we're the biotech capital of the world, these technologies are going to affect, like I said, even the high skill jobs. And so what you'll see in the case I'm going to make in a few moments is if you are a lab technician or a scientist in those fields, you need to learn how to work with AI. So, but yes, biotech will be transformed.
Okay, question from John Tharakan. How does this impact engineering education? Are these skills you're talking about really teachable? Are they teachable?
They are. And, you know, John, thank you for the question. So what you'll see is, I think there are 3 broad areas that we have to look at. And the slides that I'm about to present are based on my interpretation and scanning of the research, in that you have to have certain technology skills, you have to have certain relational skills, and importantly, you have to have certain cognitive skills. You have to change the way you think about organizations. And so they can be taught like any other you know, skill or competency. And then they have to be, you know, utilized, and then they have to be honed, and they have to be, you know, further developed. It's not a one-time endeavor, you know, and that's another instance, or excuse me, example that I'll offer. You have to really adopt what what most people are calling lifelong learning around these skills. So.
Okay. Samuel Mukasa says, Scott, by focusing on the US, we're talking about a small percentage of the global population. What about the rest?
It's a good question. You know, we're all local, so that's why the US for me has been topical. The slides I shared with you were significant research just to get the US data. What you're seeing globally, for example, even in preparing for this, because I didn't know the audience, for example, India, believe it or not, is on the forefront of a lot of automation. They are, and I think a lot of Asia is, and Japan has been, undeniably the leader in automation now for 20, 30 years, largely of the demographic. I think it's going to change. It's going to be very localized, the manner in which these technologies are adopted as a function of industry. That was the point I was trying to make. There are some industries where you'll see AI take hold very deep, and there are other industries it won't take hold. It's only if it can better improve the process and deliver more efficiencies and open more doors to innovation. Always focus first on the industry process. And this is not as much from my research, but is more so from my experience in doing wide-scale information technology deployments. What's the process we're trying to improve? When you let the technology lead, you typically fail. When you start with the business process and move to the technology, that's when an implementation is successful. So for the rest of the globe, that holds throughout the globe. And I have worked and installed software in Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, and the US. That always holds. What's the business process and then the technology? If you lead with the technology, it fails. So.
Okay. This is from Ed Gallagher saying, Scott, good to see you.
Hi, Ed. How are you?
What's your take on virtual and augmented reality impact on the educational workforce?
Ed, that's a great question. And let me tell you something. If you asked me that question 6 months ago, and if I think about this as a horse race, and the horse race is these disruptive technologies, AI, blockchain, virtual reality, augmented reality, cobots, I would have put VR and AR in probably last place behind blockchain. I talked to a lot of people at Gartner, and I talked to a lot of people at Forrester, and I'm a big blockchain proponent. And they tell me that that adoption just isn't happening. It's too complex, it's too costly, there's issues of trust, people can't get over the privacy. And so now blockchain for me is in the last place as far as these technologies go. In virtual reality and augmented reality, from what I've seen, given some of the work that I've been involved with, I think maybe in first. And the reason for it is the technology's the most mature, the cost of deployment is the cheapest related to these, and the impact, I think, is the biggest on the frontline worker. So yes, I think virtual reality and augmented reality are going to be the first future of work technology out of the gate in the next 5 years that has wide scale acceptance. It's nice to see you, Ed. I hope you're doing well.
Okay, and a comment from, my name is Joshua Kengere Mogaka from Kenya. Thank you for the very insightful topic so far. Question, how can higher education in developing countries be well suited to play a key role in the reskilling revolution in case of developed countries? Oh, okay, higher education in developed countries be suited to play a key role in the reskilling revolution as in the case of developed countries. Okay, yeah, I guess you got the question.
So I think, thank you, and I apologize, I didn't catch your name only because I have 4 or 5
Joshua Kengere. Joshua Kengere. Joshua
Kengere. Joshua. So Joshua, good question. If you look at what's being called the educational technology market, ed tech, a lot of the investment in ed tech is happening in Africa, in Asia, largely because if you look at any type of industry, its resistance to change is significant. Here in the North America, we are wedded and invested in the 4-year undergraduate model and then the 2-year graduate degree. I think that model will forever have a place, but I think we have to bring in more different credentialings that are both responsive to these new skills, can be given in a real-time atmosphere and be done online or virtually. And so I think in areas like Africa that don't have the ingrained institutions like UMass or NYU or the University of Texas, typically what you see in any industry like that, you see more innovation where there aren't the established players holding back innovation. So I think you'll see significant innovation in those areas around higher education. And I think to the benefit of the student, that always has to be the starting point. Does it benefit the student? Can I give the student skills today that they'll use tomorrow? Can I give them skills that will allow for a modular pathway that they can build upon and grow? And that's where I think we have to do a better job as higher education. And hopefully it comes out of places like Africa, in Asia, but Europe and North America, they're wedded to that old higher ed model right now.
Okay, question from Rajiv Lal. Is there a recent study on the change scenario after COVID? If so, what are the main findings?
None yet. We don't know. So automation investments look like they're up about 10%. But I would also offer, without getting too academic, any implementation of technology or innovation is first and foremost a function of cost. If I can implement a technology, look at the expenditure, the capital expenditure in the technology, and then the return on investment over a year, 5 years, and as it depreciates, is that a better use of funds than investing in people? That's always the baseline level of analysis. And right now, given the mass unemployment associated with COVID, some of the early rumblings I'm hearing are people are staying with people. So we'll see.
Okay.
All right.
Here's a comment from Koki Fuji, one of your UMass MBA students based in Japan.
Okay.
What do you expect big data analysis would be applied into science B2B industry? I'm working in a big global science company. We understand the importance of cutting edge technology utilization such as big data analysis,
Yep.
but it's still very early development stage to apply technology to actual manufacturing.
It is. And if there is one skill as the presentation moves on, and as you'll see, it is the ability to work with data. You know, that is going to be the number one skill. Most business leaders that I talk with anecdotally, they're swimming in data, they're struggling with data, and they don't know how to leverage the data for competitive advantage. They have a really hard time discerning how the data can be actionable, and that takes a certain amount of skills. And so to Ashwin's point around learning these new skills and new models, you know, there are 8-week courses out there in big data analysis. So I think it is early, and I can tell you firsthand that again, the CTOs and the CIOs that I deal with, they are struggling mightily with data. They need people with these skills. So I'm going to move forward. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think you should. Go ahead.
Great. Those are some great questions, and it really makes me thrilled that I'm here this morning. So thank you for interacting. It's always tough. So the reskilling revolution, that is one area I think of ambiguity. And over the next 6 or 7 slides or so, I'm going to offer my perspective given what I see firsthand in the research. Because my job as a professor is really to put things in buckets so that we can better make decisions, to help structure our thinking around things like what type of skills do I need? And it is a jumble, you know, this word cloud of, you know, the skills, coding, thinking, management, emotional, critical thinking, design systems thinking, you know, what are the skills that we need? And there are, in addition to my whittling down, I would invite all of you to go out and look at some of the research that's coming out of the World Economic Forum. They coined the term the reskilling revolution, for example. I would invite you to go out and look at some of the work that McKinsey's doing in this area. It really is some great work looking at, you know, a wide swath of companies. And so we are seeing new skills that are taking hold in the workplace. To Ed Gallagher's point, we have a virtual reality world here where workers are interacting. This to the question the last gentleman asked, every worker is a data worker. This comes from a Wharton study, Harvard Business Review. You know, the number one skill that employers are looking for now is critical thinking. and so on and so forth. Here you see, Gen Z, baby boomers, Gen Y, millennials, all working together and causing great issues, working with AI. So these skills, from Working Nation, the Journal, Harvard Business Review, MIT, there are new skills that you need to be effective and to be marketable. And what do they look like? So the first thing is these new skills are going to be like the old skills. They're going to be industry and process specific. You're not going to see any skills that come out of left field. There's a common misnomer, I just fed into it, that technology affects jobs, and it does, but it doesn't affect jobs first, it affects processes first. And then as a function of that, jobs are either lost or created. One thing I would say, and every job moving forward, every job is going to be a STEM job. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the STEM acronym, it's science, technology, engineering, and math, okay? So you have to understand how those new technologies are going to create STEM jobs. So as I boil it down, you'll see, I think the new ways of working are, the skills and the thinking and the relating to other folks in the organization. So the future of work, first are the technology skills, data competency, digitalization, interface, the cognitive skills, interdisciplinary thinking, critical thinking, and systems thinking. And our relational skills are generational fluency, virtual fluency, and cultural fluency. They vary again across industry and organizations. Certain ones are going to take certain heightened importance, others less so. But these again these are the three buckets that if you ask me that someone has to be considering as their career develops in the next decade. So let's start with our technology skills. So, I'm sorry, let's start with our interface skills as a slide build here. So when I say interface competency, it's the ability to work with future of work. And this isn't a blue collar, white collar phenomenon. You have radiologists that are learning how to work with AI to better identify ailments. One that I saw firsthand, utility workers here in the States working with drones on power line maintenance, fascinating. This was an incredibly dangerous job in the past where they would have workers either in helicopters or climbing on power lines, and now they're using drones. And it's that synergy of the worker understanding how a line might be deteriorating and using a drone to make that job safer. So that's, again, what we're talking about here today. How is technology affecting the actual process, and as a result, having the job evolve? So as I said a few moments ago, automation, the trend is accelerating relative to automation, about 10% up, even in a COVID year. And robots and cobots, cooperative robots, they will be central to our team. So the interface competency asks you to say, how is that technology affecting my job? The other one I missed was surgeons. There are now surgeons that are using robots in a distributed fashion with virtual reality to do surgery a continent away. It's amazing. So how do you work with these technologies? That's the first thing. How do you interface with these new technologies? We are all data workers. Data competency is, again, the _1 skill. I can give you the hard data on this. Wharton showed a huge, massive shortage around data fluency. Glassdoor, which is an employment agency here, one of the leading ones in the States, of the 10 fastest growing jobs, 8 of them had data in the title. Data analyst, data warehousing, you name it. And so if you don't have that base skill level relative to data, how data is captured, how it's stored, how it's analyzed, how it's used, the analytics associated with it, you're going to put yourself at a disadvantage. This is certainly something I would, again, leave you with in this presentation. Digitalization. Digitalization is the general notion that we are now working where every system is connected within an organization. And if you look at healthcare, for example, another industry here in Boston, you know, the simple electronic medical record, you know, which has been around for over a decade, but has now gone in adoption from a decade ago, about 25% to almost full adoption, is changing the relationship between the doctor, the insurance company, the specialist, and that is digitalization. And again, this is from Glassdoor. 50% of jobs required a baseline understanding of digitalization, the cloud, cybersecurity, pervasive computing, tablets. Now it's 90%. So having those basic digitalization skills are critical. The cognitive skills, and these are the ones, I forget the gentleman who asked the question around, you know, how can we teach these skills? You know, these are the ones I think that stick with you the longest. I think they've always been important. I say cognitive. A lot of people are calling these soft skills, and I don't think they're soft at all. I think these are skills that can both be taught, and like I said, you can work on them and they can evolve with you as you go through your career. The first is a general sense of systems thinking, the Internet of Things. The picture here is Amazon Go. Amazon is opening a series of stores here in the United States where there are no people. You walk in, they scan your phone, they look at your body, they look at your biometrics, everything on the shelves is weighted, they have cameras, and it is just one big connection of technology. And that came as a product of someone pulling that system together. Systems thinking is going to be critical to understand that interplay, that dance between human, machines, and data, and how it all works. You will hear the term emerging of the smart factory, the smart hospital, the smart store. That is systems thinking, and that is all based on the platform of the Internet of Things. So building those systems thinking skills are critical. Similarly, critical thinking skills, and McKinsey again, 40% of organizations report critical thinking skills are lacking in their workforce. And for me, when I say critical thinking, it is understanding not only can we do a certain thing, but should we do a certain thing. Critical thinking puts humanity at the table. It helps understand, well, we have a factory that we can automate, but it will displace 70 workers. Is there a different way of doing that? And that, for me, is, again, something that has to be utmost as we approach the future of work. I teach a graduate level course in the future of work, and my number one theme for it is that we need to take an active role in shaping it. This is not a foregone conclusion. We will change the way we work, but we need to change it in a way that is more equitable, that helps more people be involved, that gives more paths for development. And so that is what is central to critical thinking. Finally, interdisciplinary thinking. Harvard has done some research here in that specialization is out. And we need people, again, that see the larger picture, that can reach across their left and right brain. You know, a lot of the things and a lot of the jobs here, my example is user design and interface. That is typically a job that draws both from engineering and the sciences, but also the behavioral sciences. And so interdisciplinary thinking and being able to work with people that view things differently, that have a different perspective, that bring a different level of skills to the table. Again, super, super important. And then finally, the relational skills. If you think about work is a function of our relationships. It's a function of coordinating effort to a goal. It's that simple. And so COVID accelerated, but even prior to this, you need a level of virtual fluency. And I would make this point by telling you all of the research over the past few months has shown that this work from anywhere movement is really stuttering. It is really faltering. People are burnt out. Cultures are deteriorating. Innovation is down. Here in the United States, basic innovation patents are down 10%. The reason for that is we don't know how to work virtual. We don't have the skills. We don't have the fluency. And again, you can develop those skills. And until we get past the notion that Zoom is being virtual, we're going to continue to struggle. And so the work experiment has failed, and it's time for organizations to better help and assist their workers to do this. Cultural fluency. Globalization is the new norm, and that is on a global level, but locally, even here last summer with the Black Lives Movement protests, local social justice and equity and inclusion movements are going to continue to shape organizations. There is less of a boundary between work and society. And certainly the new generation coming in, and I'm going to comment on this in a second, there has to be a level of cultural fluency. How do we work with people that have a different lived experience than us, whether that be an American citizen working in India, or perhaps someone in Boston who is working across racial or ethnic boundaries? That is the future of work. And so we need to learn how to manage those differences. We need to learn how to deal with conflict. We need to have open communications. That cultural fluency, again, is central to what the future of work will be. And then finally, we're at a place that's kind of weird, the generational aspect of this. One of the biggest challenges organizations are now dealing with is they look like a multi-generational home. You have baby boomers working with Gen Z, millennials, and Gen X, Gen Y as well. And so those individuals come with different values, different work ethics, different technology usage behaviors, and managing across demographics, again, is going to be one of the challenges with the future of work. So we had a lot of questions. I have a few more slides I'd like to get to. I'll go through those in a good pace. We'll share the slides with folks. But this is the future of work. You know, there's the three buckets. There's the technology skills central to your job. There's the cognitive skills central to your perspective on work, and the relational skills of how you work with people in a respectful fashion to achieve the goals of the organization. What role will higher ed play? Well, if you think about the sheer scale of this here in the US, again, and I do apologize, I don't have the global numbers. There's about 160 million people in the US workforce. And in the next 2 decades, there'll be about 40 million displaced and about 80 million jobs transformed. It's going to be a massive effort. At the central of that effort, it needs to be higher ed. The problem is higher ed doesn't typically do education in a quick fashion. Someone who's been displaced when they're 45 years old, it's tough to ask them to go back for a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. They just need the skills to get back into the workforce. And the current model in higher ed only serves about the 18 to 25-year-old, and that is less than 10%, or excuse me, about 20% of the US workforce population. So there's going to be some people that need to be better engaged. And so higher ed, we need to respond better. We have to develop new approaches for degrees. I'll give you a good example here. The first bullet point I have is timing. The curious case of the Python and artificial intelligence. One of the mantras or sayings that you'll see with the future of work is that when someone's displaced, someone will say, oh, you need to learn to code, meaning you need to learn how to program a computer for your next career. That is both insensitive and potentially inaccurate and damaging advice. By all accounts, artificial intelligence will be able to write full Python programs in about 5 years. So by the time you go through an average bachelor degree, which is about 4.6 years, you not only will be in the job market competing with someone from the college in the next town, you will be competing with artificial intelligence. So learn to code is not a good piece of career advice. But I give that to illustrate that the problem isn't with AI, the problem is with the pace of higher education. We need to do a better job of timing. We need to customize degrees to individuals. There has to be more transparency so that employers can understand what those skills are. And that's at the core of what we're struggling with here in higher ed. I do think we're changing because the value we provide is in credentialing, and we give a signal to the market that that person has received rigorous training in a certain skill. And so we can do that outside the traditional bachelor and master's degrees. We need to start developing new credentials, modular modules that are both quick and can be used again the next day. So you're going to see Boston University here locally just launched a modular competency-based MBA. You may get badges or micro-credentials in feedback theory, user interface, integration design, and then a competency certificate in embedded system design based on those 4. Go work, get 4 more badges, get another competency, and before you know it, over the course of maybe a decade, you'll have earned the degree. But in that decade, you'll have learned skills that you can apply in real time and skills that people can see. They can be digital badges attached to your LinkedIn profile. These are the new modular competency-based credentials that are emerging. Another one, we're starting to see certificate pathways, perhaps aimed at people that aren't suited well, that mid-career displaced individual. This is a cyber certificate degree, and it grows from a certification fundamentals, intermediate, network, and it's easier for someone to tackle this than it is a formal degree that may have credits that are not applicable to their situation. So higher ed, we're going to have to adapt, or the reskilling revolution will pass us by. We're already starting to see companies like Amazon and Google train their workers, and the reason they give is that higher ed isn't as responsive as it needs to be, and that's going to be a problem. But I think you are seeing a change starting to happen. For you, and I have a book up in the right-hand corner called Lifespan, and it basically argues that this generation of individuals being born now will live well into their hundreds. And so education has to change, and it is changing. Gone are the days of the 30-year career. The Bureau of Labor suggests that we'll have 10 career transitions in a lifetime, the future of work, and that 85% of the jobs created in the next decade don't exist today. And that's an amazing statistic if you think about it. 85% of the jobs 10 years from now have not been created. And what are the skills that we need to have those jobs? This past weekend, the future of work is ramping up again. Governor Baker here in Massachusetts announced he is launching a future of work study. And it's looking at how the future of work technologies and COVID are interacting. So this is central to here, where I'm sitting here in Massachusetts. And I'm done. I did have to rush through those last few slides, but it's a function of the questions, and thank you. So I'm open now for any more questions, Ashwin and Krishna.
Okay, yeah, sure. Ashwin, we have about 6 minutes left, so I'll just quickly run through the Joshua. The slides will be shared, no problem. And let's keep coming. The questions are being hired in future. I'm going to more. I'm quite not sure what the question is. I take an entrepreneurship course, and we are taught critical thinking. But how is a way of thinking taught? How can you teach a way of thinking?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different models for that. I think critical thinking always has to be structured. And I know there's the Kaizen process and of continuous improvement, and people will use that. I know Ashwin and I, we'll use the business model canvas. Critical thinking, it's never anything that's like a free range chicken or a free range cow. You just can't sit down and let it happen. Even if you look at any of that type of thinking training, it has to happen in a process, and the process allows for creativity. But I think, I know this, it has to go in either a parallel or serial fashion that has a process for defining how that thinking happens. So,
Okay, question from Rajiv Lal. What are your views on some industry leaders saying that formal degrees are not important anymore for new recruitment?
I think we sit downstream from industry. If you think about UMass Lowell was originally founded as the Lowell Textile Institute here in Lowell. It was founded because we were trying to better help textile manufacturers in the Industrial Revolution in Lowell to run their factories in a better fashion. So while I might caution the abandonment of traditional degrees entirely, I do think foundationally a young 18 to 22-year-old should get a broad perspective on the world. So after that, I would tend to agree, but I think a bachelor's degree is important. Now, having said that, there are a lot of people that argue that a bachelor's degree does not work towards an inclusive environment. There are a lot of people, they call them completers, really completers. And I think the numbers now, there are about 30 million completers in the United States. These are people that did not finish a degree. I think we need to have more of an open mind and recognize that a degree doesn't signify whether or not a person can do the job. And we can't discount those people out of hand. We just can't. It's not the right way.
Okay, is there an increasing number of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary courses and degrees being introduced?
There are. Personally, I was interim dean for a couple of years at UMass Lowell, and I worked with the current provost here at UMass Lowell, a gentleman named Joe Hartman. And Joe and I worked together to develop a graduate degree in engineering management. And it is a degree for an engineer who has gone up the corporate ranks and is now not as much on the front lines working with engineering, whether it be civil, industrial, but is more of a manager, has to manage teams, has to set strategic plans. And Joe and I developed an engineering management degree that was designed interdisciplinary across business and engineering. And you see more and more of those degrees.
Concept of global universities. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, what do you mean global?
I don't know. Maybe. I just thought, that's all. I guess with that, I'll give this back to Ashwin. Come in, Ashwin, you can wind it up.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Badula and Scott. That was an excellent presentation discussion. You gave a lot to think about, not only the new work environment and the skills needed, but also the impact on the higher educations. So thank you all for attending this webinar. The recording and the slides will be available. Please contact us, ge2@uml.edu. Our next webinar is going to be on April 15th, and we'll also provide some additional perspectives on the pandemic and the workforce migration. It will be equally interesting and very useful to the educators. So thank you again, Scott. Thank you so much, Krishna.
Thank you
for attending.
Thank you, everybody. Be safe, be happy, be healthy. Thank you, Scott. There
Take
you
care.
go.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks,
Bye.
Scott.